After finishing his daily stew, Boromir usually exercised by standing over the iron hoop. He couldn't stand upright, but he could drop to his haunches, then half stand again. He pulled on the chain to strengthen his arms. As he crouched to his haunches again, he raised his head as the door clunked and clanged open. He couldn't see them fully, but there were two of them, indistinct in the corner of his eye. He'd assumed they were orcs, but they walked differently, almost like men, and they breathed differently. He lowered his dish and looked up to his left as they approached him on either side. They were hooded and wore face scarves. Yes, they stood like men, but there was orc behind the eyes. Boromir felt an uncanny sense of dread as one of the things pulled something from its belt. It bent and put a sack over Boromir's head. The dark shapes of the orc men moved around him through the sackcloth. They stood to either side of him for a while, until there was the slosh of a full bucket, then the splash of water on the stone floor. One of the orc men pushed Boromir's head towards the floor, as the other pulled the nape of his collar back. He felt a cold, wet thing on his upper back. It felt like nothing more than a screwed-up cloth down the back of his undershirt. He breathed heavily, daring not to move as the orc men walked out of the cell. The door boomed shut. Much later, Boromir heard the goblins snigger and the clunk of the dish on the floor in its usual place. The sack was still over his head, and the cold, wet rag was still stuffed down the back of his nightshirt. He had not dared to move since the orc men had visited him. How long ago that was, he couldn't tell. As the goblins' footsteps receded, two sets of boots entered the cell. He could smell them, the orc men. What abominations had Saruman created? The sack was wrenched from Boromir's head, and even in the dim torchlight, he squinted. He twisted round as one of the orc men stepped behind him. The thing bent and removed the damp rag. Boromir couldn't help letting out a shuddering, ragged sigh. He had to admit, the episode had unnerved him. He dared not move, expecting something dire would happen if he did. It was only later that he realized it was just a damp cloth. This was something new, orcs toying with men's minds. But his relief was premature. While the orc man pulled the rag tight over Boromir's face, there was again the slosh of water in a pail. A pause. Just an instant when Boromir thought this might end well and the orc things might leave. But then there was the shock of frigid water across his face. His first instinct was to inhale, and he spluttered as he took water in. He coughed and cried out, and the thought that he was about to die struck him across the head like a rock. The water kept pouring across his upturned face. Now he knew what drowning felt like. He was at the bottom of the Anduin, staring up at the dimming moon. And then the water stopped. The orc man behind him whipped the rag away from Boromir's face. He spluttered and coughed and sobbed as the abominations left. It was dusk when Tariel made camp on the northern slopes of the Treithon. She stretched her canvas between two pine trees and built a small fire. She'd chosen a wooded hollow overlooking the gap, and thankfully the weather had stayed fine enough that she could see across to Methedras. From here she could see any movement through the gap. The journey to Rohan had been straightforward. The road along the western shore of Long Lake was well kept, and it veered away from the eastern eaves of Mirkwood as it went south. The ride across the drab, open moors of the Brownlands had been dreary, but the day had brightened as she crossed the Anduin at the South Undeep ferry. And then there'd been her sojourn in the Fold, waiting and watching as the Gondorian had sallied around southern Rohan, drinking and whoring for 3 weeks. She'd followed him at a distance when he finally left Edoras, but it had been a week since the Gondorian had been captured, and in that time Toriel had seen only a few orc patrols. It seemed that the men of Rohan were watching the gap as much as she. The possibility that Boromir had escaped Orthanc by night and had passed through the gap under cover of darkness did not escape her. She had made forays to the north, tracking as she went, but had found nothing but hoof prints and wolf dung. Hooves. She heard the soft thud of a single horse behind her now, across the clearing. She turned to see a dappled grey miras walking through the trees towards her. She walked across the camp and welcomed the horse, taking the reins and stroking her nose.
Mae govannen miras.
She hummed as the horse nodded. Tariel held the reins as she reached around and half drew Boromir's sword from its saddle sheath. She took an arrow from his quiver. A messenger bag, blanket and waterskin were tied to the horse's tack. She opened one of the saddlebags and found cheese wrapped in wax paper and a bundle of dried beef. She rummaged through another bag, pulled out a silver collar.
"Good girl,"
she said, patting the miras on the neck. The collar was more of a hefty silver chain, the links of which were fashioned in the shape of the white tree of Gondor. The pendant, too, was silver and mounted with a single white stone. She held it to the late golden light for a moment, then returned it to its pack. And then she felt something else there, at the very bottom of the saddlebag. A letter, sealed with red wax. She turned it over and read the Tengwa script.
Elrond Perethel.
She slid her fingers under the fold of paper and broke the seal.